Welcome everyone to this. This is a special edition of the CEC Monthly Exchange. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name is Annette Kendall. I work at the University of Missouri Extension, and I am the State Specialist for Rural Innovation and Rural Economic Development Strategy. Sorry, I'm a little bit off my game. I think I had some bad shrimp, so apologize. I'm on the struggle bus a little bit right now. This CEC Monthly Exchange is held bi-monthly normally, the first Friday and the last Friday of each month. And all of our content is aimed at empowering rural communities in Missouri. So we carefully curate these sessions to bookend your months with valuable lessons and conversations on rural economic development. So whether you're in economic development, community development, entrepreneurship, education, or someone who is just passionate about rural advancement, these webinars are designed to offer ongoing support and education and create a community where we can share what's going on. We can learn, connect, and grow together. All right. Economic vitality in our rural communities in Missouri starts with shared knowledge and collective effort. And so this is a platform to bring all of us who are working in that space together. So on that note, very excited. This, as I said, this is a special webinar. It's not the first or the last Friday. This is a special one because we have a special guest, Dr. James Stapleton. He is a seasoned entrepreneur and educator, and he has been playing a pivotal role in promoting the technology industry throughout Missouri. He was a co-founder of Codefi, which was the first technology incubator in Cape Girardeau, and his efforts have significantly contributed to the growth of technology jobs, particularly through innovative funding models that support early stage tech startups. And his insights, I'm looking forward to hearing his insights and more about his initiatives, because they are a vital part of fostering economic vitality in our rural regions throughout Missouri. So let me spotlight James here, and welcome, James, and thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you, Annette, and good afternoon, everyone. I think there must be a bug in the air because, as Annette and Jackie were saying, that they had some of their own issues. I'm working through COVID summer 24 version, and so I hope you'll excuse me if I cough once in a while or take a drink of water occasionally. But I'm thrilled to be here. I really appreciate what the university and extension is doing to really try to bring together organizations and stakeholders and communities that really understand that entrepreneurs are kind of the heartbeat of our regional and local economies, and that want to learn more and to work more together and collaborate in ways where we can actually activate more economic growth through entrepreneurship. So I want to tell a little bit of our story, Codefi story this afternoon. I don't have near the voice to talk long enough for us to go the full hour today, but if you'll give me 15 or so minutes, I'll give you some insights about sort of our history, some things that we have learned and really are thinking about now as we move forward. And then we're really excited for the conference coming up this fall. And I'll make a note of that before hopping off here. But if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen and use a few slides to kind of organize my thoughts. And obviously, as we get to the end of my talk this afternoon, then I really would love to have questions and discussion with anyone that's joining us today. I see several names I recognize and familiar faces, and so a brief introduction. Obviously, I'm sort of in my third chapter of my career. I began as a young entrepreneur, really started my first company when I was 18 years old, and kind of worked for about 15 years in tech and creative startup environments, and then kind of took a hiatus from being self-employed, went back to grad school, got a couple of master's degrees and a PhD, and ended up in a long roundabout way coming back nearer my home state of Kansas and took a job at Southeast Missouri State University in 2005 and worked there for about 10 years. Some of my friends I see from Southeast Missouri are on the call this afternoon. Obviously, the university gave me a great chance to build an entrepreneurship center there, both academic programs and outreach programs. And we ended up getting involved not only in Southeast Missouri, but in the larger lower Mississippi Delta region, in a 9-state region represented by a federal agency called the Delta Regional Authority. And that time period and the insights that I gained from working with that federal agency turned out to be the triggers for me to become more interested in what I could do to help with more regional economic development strategies specific in tech entrepreneurship. And so Codefi is a venture and workforce development organization. We began about 10 years ago, and really kind of began originally as an entrepreneurship support organization and learned pretty quickly, as we all know now, that not only in traditional sectors, but in emerging sectors, workforce is key. And we ended up having to build and develop a workforce development wing of Codefi that now is one of the largest, longest standing software developer training programs. That is a non-traditional program that helps individuals get on a pathway to additional education and employment. And I'll talk about that a little more this afternoon as well. And so we've been at this about 10 years, and I'll talk a little bit about our growth as we get forward here in the conversation. So I'll share some of kind of who we are and what drives us, a really brief history. I want to talk about the latest development of our work, which is called the Southern Missouri Innovation Network. And then I'll do a little bit of a sharing of what we've learned about supporting tech-based startups in places outside of major metros. Yeah, so we started in Codefi in 2014. In Cape Girardeau in 2014. The population then was about 39,000. And if you're familiar with that region, Southeast Missouri has not grown like other regions of the state have. In fact, very small growth over a 25-year period. And unfortunately as well, had really high rates of poverty, which were increasing on an annual basis. And as you can imagine, had no tech economy in 2014, really, to speak of when we began. And the photo you might see here is of a downtown neighborhood in Cape Girardeau, kind of the epicenter of the four or five largest buildings in Cape's pretty downtown, right off the river that you see there. And when we began, that neighborhood was empty, all those buildings vacant and in disrepair, having gone through multiple efforts in some cases to tear them down. And we're happy to say now it's a thriving commercial and tech district, and is also the home of the area's only Tier 1 hotel, which is a Marriott Courtyard Hotel that sits right across the old Marquette Tower, which is the home of Codefi's 21,000 square foot co-working facility in our corporate offices. So a quick kind of origin about why we do what we do. I often get asked, and have over the years, why we chose to focus on startups. And the answer is kind of a long story, but the short version of that is about 15 years ago, I began looking at research data to try to understand what kinds of companies were starting jobs. Sounds like a simple question. It's a question that I was asked by the federal director of an agency called the Delta Regional Authority. And that led to a couple of years of research work that we did with that agency. And it led to me learning more about the business dynamic statistics data set from the US Census Bureau. That data set had just been introduced then and was a marvel if you're a researcher for many reasons. Initially, it was kind of fascinating because it provided us data where we could really look at the dynamics of a company at the establishment level, and also track data on the firm level of those establishments that they owned, and we could track that data from birth to death of that firm. So, and we were able to do that over at that time, a 30-year period. Now it's almost 40 years of data. So it really gives you a chance to zero in on what kinds of things are driving employment. And in fact, now we sort of have an understanding of the evolution of job creation over that period of time. And so we've learned four primary things, kind of going back to around 1980. All of us are aware that really what's driving job creation and growth now is kind of move from industrial through a service sector timeframe, and now really kind of in a knowledge economy, at least in some parts of our state. The one thing we didn't know, and still I think is not well known, is really that young firms create all of the net jobs in most communities. So if you look at this data and you really try to figure out over time, we know that companies create jobs or add jobs, established companies, I should say. Over time, they may destroy some of those jobs or reduce the number of jobs that they hold. And regardless of industry, it turns out that if it weren't for young firms being started that are of the age of 1 year old to 5 years old, as you see in this little diagram here, we would, from existing companies, be left with, in most years, net negative jobs. So in other words, if we just woke up every year at the beginning of the year and we said, hey, we're going to turn off entrepreneurship, we're not going to help anybody start any new companies and create any new jobs, in most communities, in most years, that year, then we would end up with less jobs than we started with. So lots of reports and studies have been done now. We know young firms are net job creators. Even in Missouri, studies are done occasionally, and I think the number is somewhere around the sort of low 80% range of all net jobs being created are from young firms. The odd thing among our findings over this period of time is that while this job creation is coming out of young firms, employment has actually been increasing steadily in older firms over the same time frame. One of the things driving that anomaly is the decline of entrepreneurship, or the decline of the share of startups in our national economy. And this chart shows you that since 1979 or so, not including a little spike after COVID in 2020, we've been on a fairly steady trend line down in terms of the national share of startup firms. We're not starting as many companies, or there aren't as many companies as a share of all of the companies in our economy as there used to be. And so that signals a problem, I think. Obviously, if new firms create net jobs and we have a smaller share of those, then that's problematic. And there are some other things that we can really talk about at some point as it relates to entrepreneurship. One of the things in our state that should concern us is the survival rate of new companies in our state isn't good. It's I think the last data we saw, we ranked 45th in the country in startup survival rate. And in the southern Missouri, most southern states, counties in Missouri, we can track data that shows this decline of entrepreneurship over even a 40-year period. So I think there are plenty of reasons I can answer the question why startups when people talk to ask that question and why Codefi focuses there. And then the next follow-up question is always, well, then why tech startups? Obviously, there are a lot of new companies in different industries intended to be different things that are started every day. We focus on companies that have the ability to become traded economy companies that are high growth, that actually attract revenue from outside of regions into those regions. And so I was thankful to see that earlier this year that the Missouri Chamber published an extensive report that was done sharing the results of a study really measuring the growth of the tech economy in Missouri. We don't often talk about tech in Missouri. Tech, Missouri is really known for manufacturing, for ag, for biotech, and some things that kind of connect with the agriculture economy in the state. But this report really helped shed some light onto the growth of tech in the state, including that last year the gross domestic product of the tech industry in Missouri is about $38 billion, and that's about 10% of Missouri's economy. What might surprise people is it's nearly the same amount as manufacturing. So while we don't think of Missouri as being a tech state, there's a lot of tech industry going on here. We obviously also know, and it was shared in this report, that tech industries and tech occupations provide high wage, high occupational quality opportunities for people. In fact, in this study, what was mentioned was that tech occupations provide the second highest ranked employment impact in Missouri. So I'm sure some of you on this call realize that for every job created in a company, that job actually creates some employment impact that leads to the creation of other jobs. And in the case of technology, it's nearly 3 jobs are created for every job we create in tech, which is second in the state. And later this fall, Codefi and our partners at Missouri State University and the E-Factory, who are collaborators with us in the Southern Missouri Innovation Network, will be publishing kind of a Southern Missouri version of that Tech 2030 report, and have been analyzing the data for a while, looking at the southernmost 47 counties compared to the entire state and how we're doing compared to the U.S. as well. And again, I think people will be surprised at the growth of tech industry employment in Southern Missouri. Obviously, on the left side of this graph, what you see is where at about 2023, the trend line suggests that employment in tech industries for Missouri, which tends to trend along pretty closely with the country, will begin to outgrow the tech employment in Southern Missouri. And we're going to spend some time in that report specifically talking about why. One of the reasons is we're not starting enough companies in those tech industry sectors to actually keep up and drive the additional growth. The projections suggest that more of that growth is going to come from the major metro areas in Kansas City and St. Louis. And secondly, then, a chart that looks a little different on the right side here, tech occupation, meaning tech occupations are available and needed in all industries. Regardless of the industry, people do tech work. That's different than jobs in tech industry. And you'll see here that Missouri has been and appears to be on a trend line to keep falling more and more behind in the number of people that live in our state that are in a tech occupation. And unfortunately, Southern Missouri, it looks like, based on these trends, will kind of follow that pattern. So we've got some work to do, obviously, both in the state and in Southern Missouri to try to take advantage of what appears to be long-term and sustained growth in tech. So how does this all tie back to Codefi? Well, as my co-founder here, Chris Carnell, points out, we really began to think when we started Codefi that, or learn that we really needed to be a lot of things at a lot of different places and time. At about that time, 10 years ago or so, there was a big startup movement moving across the country called Lean Startup. And I was able to be a part of that in the early years, actually working with UC Berkeley and Stanford and some of the I-Core programming that sort of, I think, shepherded in and made Lean Startup kind of a thing. And the kind of godfather of that movement, Steve Blank, was sort of known initially for talking about the fact that startups were not small versions of large corporations. And one of the things that Chris has really brought to our forefront in thinking is that small towns and rural communities are not just smaller versions of metros. We have to do things differently. We don't have the same infrastructure to work from. And I think that's why programs like the CEC program are particularly helpful, because we have to overcome some of the differences between us and our larger versions. And over time, that led Codefi to really create kind of a concept around what a framework of programs would look like, really trying to develop an understanding of all the things we needed to do at one time to be able to help communities and regions really drive the outcomes of local wealth creation and local quality employment that we're all after. And so we really focus from this model on the direct drivers. And suffice it to say, we learned over time that there's a supply-demand element to every sector of the economy. And in the case of tech, obviously, we have to create companies. We have to be able to provide capital for those companies and a culture for those companies to experiment and thrive, at the same time that we're making sure we can supply the talent that they need. And that creates increased access to these high quality tech jobs. So we at Codefi have ended up developing a series of programs over time that fill all the gaps in that matrix. And this is where it gets really difficult in some rural areas, because even in larger communities like Springfield, Missouri, where I live now, or a smaller regional hub like Cape Girardeau in southern Missouri, we don't have all of the organizations that provide all of the sort of nuanced and specific expertise and programs and resources that you find in a major metro. So we have to build them. So this crazy busy chart really shows over our 10-year history by a sort of branded logo, the work that we've done and all the programs that we've had to develop. And then the business development side of this, or the business model side of all of this, has been a big part of our success. We've really learned that it's required to leverage local investment with both state and federal public resources to really drive the kind of and level of investment that's required to do all this program development and deployment. And so you can see, as we continue to grow, that model continues to be a big part of what we do. And so at the end of that 10-year timeframe, a big initiative for us began about 5 years ago, when we began having conversations with the eFactory and The executive director of the eFactory, for those of you who may not know, located in Springfield, is Rachel Anderson. And Rachel and I began talking about 5 years ago about really how we could help each other. We were, at that time, Codefi still just mostly located in Cape Girardeau, with eFactory being in Springfield on its campus at Missouri State. And really, those conversations then quickly led to the shared realization that we had that there were gaps in between those two regional anchors. And we began to then sort of expand on our conversations and try to figure out how we could close those gaps in the region that exists in between our two cities. About that same time, coming off of COVID and the pandemic, there were a couple of key statewide initiatives that were being undertaken that were related to sort of entrepreneurship capacity building. The first being this task force report. Many of you may remember in 2021, Governor Parson issued an executive order creating a task force to really study how we were going to rebuild and revitalize Missouri's small business sector. And the roadshow that ensued from that work created some high priority areas that I think that group and the stakeholders involved in providing input into it believed were the kinds of things that we needed to be able to do to rebuild this really important sector of our economy. And at the same time, the state's primary developer of technology-based economic development strategy and programming, the Missouri Technology Corporation, was undergoing never before done a really benchmark study and analysis of its work compared to surrounding states, which then manifests into the creation of a strategic plan. I've been working with MTC in one way or another for a long period of time, and I have to say that strategic plan was really overdue. We as a state weren't really working kind of from one playbook, and it's been really fantastic since the rollout of this plan to really kind of narrow our focuses to try to work together to accomplish some of the same things, to really bridge the gaps that Techonomy Partners out of Ohio identified from this benchmark study. So from those two statewide initiatives, we had the sort of playbooks and ideas for implementation plans that we needed to really move forward with the idea of the Southern Missouri Innovation Network. And so you see a map here. Many of you have seen this. It has evolved a little bit over time. We began talking about and launched Innovate SOMO in 2022 with broad-based support of leading businesses, the higher ed community, and community organizations across the region. We've raised substantial amount of federal and state competitive grant funding, as well as local match dollars. And the initial work that we had done resulted in, I think it's closer to 12 or $13 million that we have raised now and are deploying through program and services that we deliver over this network. And probably the most important part of all is the structure that we were able to put in place, which connected the communities that you see with the pins on the map, and several of those communities sort of serving in different roles. Obviously, in Cape Girardeau and Springfield, sort of anchored by our presence at Codefi, now being in both of those markets with offices and key staff, but also obviously Missouri State and the eFactory in Springfield, and then partners that came on board to take on even additional roles within the collective, providing sort of community connectedness. And so I think there's a big overlap here, as Annette talks about, CEC's role in being a connector. That's a lot of what drove our ideas about the Southern Missouri Innovation Network, really figuring out how we could connect resources, expertise, organizations, and our citizens in really accelerating growth in the entrepreneurship space. So I'm going to talk really briefly about some of the programs and services that we deliver now through Innovate SOMO. I'll talk a little less about the small business programs and services because they are primarily delivered by eFactory Small Business Development Center and the partnering small business development centers in Southern Missouri as well. But we took that task force report to heart, created several strategic sort of objectives to expand the reach of SBDC services, to increase access to programs where across Southern Missouri there are vast areas where there just isn't access to programs and services that exist in many of the other small metros or certainly the major metro areas, and also continue to have this kind of focus on talent attraction. So two primary initial programs kind of came out of that work. The first being kind of an early stage business boot camp, really developed by eFactory to really provide the kind of initial kind of hands-on consultative work that a lot of small business founders really need, connection to peer mentoring and a variety of educational resources. And this bootcamp program is a 8-week cohort-based program being delivered in person throughout the region as we speak, along with virtual versions of that as well. And in addition to that, we took the opportunity to expand a second stage small business program that Missouri Small Business Development Center had developed and continues to deliver, called Elevate, really a program to take those companies who had grown to maybe 10 to less than 100 employees, typically companies that are north of 100 million in revenue, and connecting them to the kind of mentors and coaches and other clients as well across the country through the Edward Lowe Foundation. So national representation in the program, and that program is being delivered throughout Southern Missouri as well. And then really expanding the consulting and mentoring network across Southern Missouri in both virtual and face-to-face ways. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the tech startup side of things, given that that is Codefi's focus, and try to share what we've learned over a lengthy period of time. For me, almost 20 years, having been working in rural areas to try to drive tech economy. And probably the first and most important thing I'll talk about is that to really drive more growth in the tech sector, there needs to be a focus on the funnel, really, that, like any business, has a customer base that they begin to raise awareness with and begin to move through phases to actually then end up being customers. Communities have to think about the startup funnel as well. And I think easiest way to understand this kind of complicated diagram that we have developed over time is that kind of over on the middle right of this diagram, there's a stage area there called acceleration. I'm sure most of you have heard of accelerator programs. They're kind of programs where venture capital groups or economic development organizations put together capital and resources to try to attract companies that are that have product, many times are revenue generating, oftentimes in maybe their second or third year of business, with the goal to help them accelerate and create more economic impact. It's been our learning over the last 15 years or so that you can't accelerate in smaller metro areas and rural areas what you don't have. It isn't just as easy as saying we're going to throw up one of these accelerator programs and help companies grow, we have to do all the other work, provide all the other services and capacity building to really kind of hand in hand find founders, attract founders, work in industries where there's innovation capacity, and really from the ideation stage, build more and more people, companies that are learning from each other how to do this. If you really dig into what made some of the hotbed tech startup economies in the country work, oftentimes venture capital is talked about. And while that's an element of it, what really makes them work is they have a lot of people working with a lot of other people learning how to build these companies. It's not like starting a small business, trying to build a company that can be venture financeable in a short period of time, that has capacity to grow and become a big company, is not the same thing at all. So we've learned over time, having started with an accelerator program, that we need to do all of these other things. And so that actually manifests into programs like our 120-day tech startup program. We offer this program now across Southern Missouri, and we'll begin offering it. Well, I should say we offered to individuals in Southern Missouri and beyond. We currently have participants in a cohort from around the country, obviously with a big focus in Southern Missouri. But it really takes people who have ideas through a scientific, evidence-based, world-class framework and set of experiments to really validate the demand for a product before the product ever begins to be developed. And so it's the kind of work that many founders who don't have access to people who have experience doing this don't get, and therefore go build a product and find out later nobody wanted your app, even though it was a really cool idea, and you run out of capital and the business fails. I won't go into detail about this, but you see it's a 16-week program. It's offered, programs similar to this are offered internationally. People pay $10,000 to $15,000 to participate in these, and we raise public funding so that we can provide the same kind of program at no cost for people in Southern Missouri. We also have to do capacity building in our entrepreneurial communities. So we have to have the kind of antecedents that get people interested, curious, a little more confident to take the first step. That is the kinds of things that happen at the top of that funnel. And so a shameless plug here, we'll be hosting our first Ozarks region startup weekend in September, the 13th through 15th in Springfield. And we'll have teams of individuals who, some of whom have ideas, some of whom are creative artists, some of who are software developers, some of who are investors, all working together to validate some of those concepts over a 54-hour period, the same way that we do over the 120-day startup program that I discussed momentarily, and other things. So you'll be seeing investment pitch day competitions across Southern Missouri moving forward. The announcement of other programs like startup studios, and even big weeks where we can celebrate the entrepreneurship going on specifically in Southern Missouri. And then the last thing that I'll talk about in kind of the tech startup space, a big gap that does exist in Southern Missouri and frankly in places everywhere in Missouri, is access to pre-seed capital. So in the tech startup world, as you begin to really test and more extensively validate the demand for your product, many times people need outside capital to help build that product, to help acquire customers. And if you think about it, in the very earliest stages, it's the highest risk capital anybody could ever put in a business. Therefore, even angel investors often don't want to sit in the seat of writing a check that is the first capital into one of these companies. And so the MTC strategic plan and the work Taxonomy Partners did identified this as the top gap and strategic priority for the entire state. And we took that pretty serious and created really what we think is the second type of its kind, a regionally focused set of funds that kind of combine both for-profit investment typical to venture capital and nonprofit philanthropy. So we're able to actually co-invest from charitable contributions in a nonprofit fund, funds that have been invested by limited partners in a for-profit venture capital fund to help provide this important pre-seed capital in companies in Southern Missouri. And so we're really excited. Our first pitch day will be in January of 25. We're working a bunch of companies through the funnel of our programs to really prepare for that. We'll be making both equity and revenue-based seed investments that are really founder-friendly. And the other critical part of this is that the funds were designed to help be a tool for co-investment for the Missouri Technology Corporation funds and other VC firms, not only in Missouri, but in other states we've worked in. And it takes a lot of structure to make this happen. We've had to do probably 18 months of work, really just to put the legal structure in within Codefi's foundation and our 501c3 corporation, really to help provide the vehicle to do this. And then many people know that Codefi also provides training to software development individuals who are seeking to be software developers. And obviously, we were kind of selfish when we started doing this. We began realizing very early on that there weren't enough software developers to work in the new companies in Southern Missouri, at that time in Cape Girardeau, that we were creating. And we weren't able to find enough graduates from traditional 2-year and 4-year college and university programs. And so we joined what at that time was a growing number of organizations providing non-traditional training in what began as kind of a boot camp program that has now grown into a full 12-month part-time program that individuals take mostly virtually in the evening and on weekends, that don't have to have any technology background and are then prepared for entry-level occupations in software development. And then over the years, we've also added elements to or around that program, that adult coding program, beginning with the creation of a program called the Youth Coding League. That is an after-school program that is provided to specifically rural schools and with a mission around access to young people who either socioeconomically or because of their race or gender don't normally get access in the public curriculum in schools to learn about coding and computer science. And it's been amazing to watch that program grow. We're in over 10 states now, thousands of 5th through 8th graders working in that after-school program. And then over the last year, also creating with our partners in 2-year and 4-year higher education curricular pathways, where individuals who have completed our adult training program then can convert that on-the-job experience into credit in both certificate and in 2-year and 4-year degree programs. And you'll be seeing some announcements soon about some of the universities and colleges who have approved the articulation agreements to do that. So I'll take a breath there and put in a plug for, obviously, CEC's upcoming conference this September. We're on board at Codefi as a sponsor. I'm thrilled that Universities Extension Group with Annette and others are doing this, and want to invite anybody who's on this call or gets access to the video here to join us. We'll be sharing some more details about our Youth Coding League program there, and even more in-depth insights about Southern Missouri Innovation Network and some of the startup programs that we're developing. And then finally, here a quick QR code for more information about Codefi and access to my personal email account. And I would love to then stop here and take time for questions. Thank you, Annette.
Thanks, James. Thanks. That was really interesting. I appreciate all the insights and data that you shared. And yes, we are very thankful to the support of Codefi for our upcoming conference. I'll put a link to that conference so you can see the agenda in the chat later. But we have a whole track. One of the tracks in the conference is dedicated to technology ecosystems in rural areas. And so we have a bunch of speakers, including people from Codefi, speaking on that topic. So we have a question here. So Jen asks, for the data that you shared, is there around Southern Missouri, is there data for the rest of the regions in Missouri in comparison to state federal?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. We became motivated for the same reason that Jim may be asking the question. We thought the statewide report was great, but we wanted to know what the data looked like for the MSAs, the counties, and the entire region of Southern Missouri. And so I'm not certain that there's anybody else working on that same analysis for the other areas in the state.
Okay. Yeah, that's something that I'll pass on to Exceed. So we have a division in the University of Missouri Extension that does that type of analysis. So I'll pass that on to Exceed. And in a minute, I will put a link to one of the reports that I was on that is tangential to this subject, but doesn't directly answer your question or relate to your question, Jen. So yes, if you have a, let me show everyone here. If you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to ask it in person, and we can you can unmute or type it in the chat. I do have a question in the meantime. So thanks for talking about the catalyzing innovation report, James. So in there, the authors, the researchers identified that there is a lack of robust marketing efforts that tell the story of innovation and entrepreneurship in Missouri. And so it's impacting on our ability to communicate the story behind our successes. And I think this is important, not just for, to say, hey, Missouri is a hub and investors, we have technology and innovation going on here, but also as a way to create more startups and companies in technology. Because what sometimes happens is, we all have ideas for apps, right? I have ideas for apps, but I know nothing about technology or coding or anything. But if I read a story about somebody who created a technology startup that came from a background, had no technology background, I'm like, well, you're just like me. Maybe you didn't even graduate college. Like, you're just like me. You come from the same town as me. If you can do it, I can definitely do it, right? And so what are your insights, James, into how can we better, create those stories or tell that story to, coordinate our efforts in telling the stories together to inspire more startups?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And triggering on that word inspire, that is a section in that strategic plan. And, I think it, from our experience in doing the same kinds of things in other areas. I mean, if we see that there is a lack of awareness in parts of our society, in parts of our communities about things that could be really positive outcomes for families, and especially related to employment, then it seems like we would want to do everything we can to help people become more aware of those opportunities. I will say, though, and that's where we have found the biggest challenge. It's interesting in local communities and regions, how ingrained I think people get in things that have worked in the past, things that drove the economy in the past. I think people get very connected to their own work, understandably so, concerned to maybe promote an awareness about things that aren't exactly the kinds of work that they do or the aspects of the economy that they work in. And so we end up with this vacuum. And in some of the small rural schools that we have, the Youth Coding League in Southern Missouri, it's the only computer science curriculum those schools have. It's an after-school program that a teacher gets paid a small stipend to take our learning and use our system and motivate kids to just become aware that there actually are people that make a living that look like them, that come from their background, that can really take care of their families, doing work that they really don't know anybody who does. And so I think whether we're talking about the startup side of the framework or the employment side of the framework, obviously we have to raise more awareness about the fact that it is doable. And that your analogy about people that have ideas but aren't tech, we work with those folks every day. We take non-tech founders and really have access to talent and resources where we can, on their behalf, kind of help develop the product as they learn more about that. So yeah, I feel like raising the awareness, being as excited about promoting technical programs in high schools as compared to athletic programs in high schools, being as excited about promoting tech as we are about manufacturing or about other hands-on kinds of careers, that would help.
Yeah, it's I remember, James, when Stacey, so I put a link to anyone that's interested in learning more about the Youth Coding League that is part of Codefi. That's Stacey DeHong. Sorry, Stacey, I see you there on the call. Stacey Lane recorded with us. I put the link in the chat there. But I remember Stacey saying, how cool would it be, in schools where the coders, the kids that are doing the coders are just as popular as the kids on the football team, right? And as a former nerd myself, I have to say that would have been pretty cool for me to have when I was at school, instead of getting picked on by the boys because I was better at it than they were. I have another, I'm not seeing any questions, but please don't, yes, and Stacey's put her email there as well. Please don't let me hog all the questions if anyone has one. But I'm also, James, Codefi, with what you're doing with Innovate Somo, is that, Innovate Somo, what you're doing, you're very hot on you collaborate with educational institutions, local governments, and startups, and bringing those all together. And so why is it important? Why are you doing that so much instead of we're just doing Codefi's thing? And how is that important for accelerating economic development, especially in rural regions? Why do we need all those components to be working together?
Yeah, I think that's there are probably some obvious reasons why, but I think maybe the perhaps less obvious reasons that we've kind of worked our way through over time. There are very unique sets of knowledge and experience and access to resources around really building these types of high growth companies that are in many ways probably unlikely, if not impossible, to develop the capacity locally everywhere to be able to support that activity. And I think at some point we began to think about, we had built up this tremendous experience over time and knowledge, made all the mistakes that you make as you pivot and iterate your way into understanding what it takes to make these systems work, and then began to have people all the time ask, well, could we help them do that in their community?
Mm-hmm.
And part of I think the struggle around capacity building is really understanding that there are certain things that may not at a local level have the critical mass to support the investment in capacity building, whether or not it would be possible anyway. And so then the nature of the network steps in, and it becomes the vehicle to provide things that otherwise wouldn't be accessible locally to anybody, as long as they're aware that they exist. And so I really believe that, when working with the collaborators in our region, and we need more companies to sign on and get involved in more banks and more school systems and more, everybody. We can share now, obviously, those resources, programs, and expertise in a way that is valuable and connective, that really does bridge that gap. And so it became, in some ways, the recipe for what we felt like was the only way to try to prevent even more time going by where the amazing growth in the tech economy just kind of flies over our communities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for all the work that you've done so far. I mean, so much effort and energy put into this, and your work and those of the people that you work with, your co-founder there, and people like Stacey and all the team at Codefi are having such an impact, not only on our economy and our communities, but also on individuals, and really transforming lives, right? By offering the services and the programs that you do. So thank you for putting that effort in. Thank you for everyone for coming today. We know it's summer and it's Friday afternoon. As I say, every Friday afternoon. My theory is that on Friday afternoons, I'm personally not too motivated to start another project. I start to tend towards procrastination. So we offer these webinars as a way for you to not have to be investing too much cognitive effort, like brain power, but also not wasting your afternoon or frittering your afternoon away because you're learning something amazing and being able to connect with other people. So that's why we have these on a Friday afternoon. But we understand it's summer also. And so we thank you for choosing the CEC Monthly Exchange webinar as a way to spend your time. I do encourage you to reach out to James and Stacey there for insights, or if you want them to speak at your event. Stacey also does a very good job of sharing the resources that they have and information about what they do, and encourage you to check out the CEC conference because that's when you can learn a lot more about this and not only be in those seminars, but enjoy the networking events where people interested in this topic will be there. And so opportunities to join forces on projects, learn from each other, share best practices, and as James said, benefit from all their experience of the things that they would do differently, insights that they have, and learn from that. Thank you again, James, and thank you, everyone, and best wishes for the weekend. And hope you get well soon, James and Jackie.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Bye.